Well, hey everyone. Welcome to a new year. And this might be your year. I know some of you secretly tell me when I see you in person that you're thinking of starting a business. If that's you, it could be this year, right? If not now, then when? How much getting ready to get ready can you do? My guest today did just that. She moved from New York, and when you hear her, she's kind of like a New York girl, originally from LA, and she moves to Birmingham, Alabama, and she opens a restaurant with no background in hospitality. And not only that, she has a brand new baby, and then 2 months later starts a tech company. And she is going to share with you the raw and real truth of what it's like to receive criticism and doubt and this sense of loneliness and how she transcended that. And so her two businesses, the restaurant is called Blue Root in Birmingham, Alabama. And then she co-founded a company called Crew, which is a tech company that provides services of bringing workers in the hospitality space to vacancies when there are seasonal vacancies or hourly vacancies, that kind of thing. And Jennifer Ryan is an absolute amazing person. And in fact, I'm going to disclaim this episode and tell you normally episodes are around 30 minutes, maybe 40. We go on for an hour. She is absolutely incredible. She was named Entrepreneur of the Year by Les Dames Ecoffier. She has a background in venture and investment, and she's such an incredible human and a mom of a 2.5-year-old. You are going to love this episode and how she even shifted my mindset after all these years about entrepreneurship. That comes in at the end, and you will want to listen to the very end. Before we get into the episode, a couple of things. First and foremost, thank you for being here. Our growth in 2023 was 50% over 2022 is incredible. We're in 166 countries and counting. And there's so much going on in my life. And I love that you are all amazing support. So I have launched a new company called TPT, and it's the pause.ai. How you can support me is if you are a woman, you can go to the site, you can sign up to get tips on perimenopause, menopause. The tech platform is being built, and then we will welcome you with open arms to use our gamified AI-driven menopause navigation tool. That's a mouthful. That's why we call it TPT. And, if you just want to check in with me and be on the list, that's cool too. And so that is coming. That was a big step for me as I changed my career and pivoted from being a co-founder to a founder and a CEO. So that is going on, something in my personal life. And it's going to be a great year. We have incredible shows coming up. We have amazing guests. And please do follow me personally on social, on Instagram. It's at Susan Sly. On X, it's at Susan Sly Live. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously. And then please follow the show channels and subscribe to Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, because you do not want to miss an episode. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with my interview with the founder of Crew and the owner of Blue Root, the amazing Jennifer Ryan. This is Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, the show that brings the no-nonsense truth of what is required to start, grow, and scale your business. I am your host, Susan Sly. Well, what is up, Raw and Real entrepreneurs, wherever you are in the world? I hope you are having an amazing, amazing day. And as you heard in the intro, this guest is incredible. Not only is she a multiple founder, defied the odds in hospitality, and on top of everything is mom of a 2.5-year-old. Like, we could do a whole show just on that. But Jennifer Ryan, I want to jump right in and ask you this question. What is it like navigating a startup and a 2.5-year-old? And recently, 6 months ago, you just moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Like, how are you navigating all of that?
You know, I would say some days better than others. And it's the old adage that it takes a village, right? My mother told me this. I've got two sisters and a brother. I've got a dad who's supportive. I mean, I've got this family around me, an incredible partner in crime in my husband, and a broader network. And I have found myself resisting what comes naturally, which is to do something by myself, to do it on my own. And I've leaned
Mm,
into being okay asking for help and asking for support. And I truly am indebted to this group of people, friends and family alike, who have supported us in this move, having a baby while launching a restaurant and then a tech startup. And it is just, as I've learned with entrepreneurship, it's not a solo venture. And the moment that I can be super clear about my blind spots or my perhaps areas of growth, the faster I can identify those and lean on folks to help me either get stronger or to provide some support in those areas. I think that's what's allowing me to do all of these things, because
mm,
I certainly wouldn't be able to do it alone. So it takes a village, I think, is the true answer. And then I think the other real and raw response is there are some really ugly days and some really ugly moments, and it's not always beautiful. And I remind myself of that as I scroll through social media or as I read an article about, another female founder who's got many children and has all the other balls in the air. And those stories of perfection are just not the real reflection of what's happening. And so I think saying it out loud, it's okay to have rough moments and rough days, and it's okay to have the lows. And I think, I'm just taking it all in stride and recognizing it's part of the journey. So it's not always
mm.
pretty, I think is the real answer.
Yeah, when you say, you have those rough days, the challenging days, and I think about for you, because as Jennifer and I were talking about before we went into the show, and the listeners all over the world, I just tell you all everything, so then there's nothing to hide. So we're contemplating leaving Scottsdale, and I said to my husband, we've been here for 10 years. I said, but my network is here, and he's like, your network's just a few people. And he listens to every show. So he's going to be like, you said that. And, but it isn't just a few people. It's VCs, it's talented tech people. It's my, support network. When I'm having those challenging days, it's my girlfriends I go to yoga class with. Was it tough to uproot and move somewhere where you didn't have a network? And how are you navigating that?
Yes, it was really hard. And it's the second time that we've done this in the last, decade. And my husband, who is incredible on so many levels, feels a deep responsibility because it's his job that's taken us to new places where we have no friends, no family, no network, no community. And the first
Mm.
was Birmingham, Alabama. I'm from California. I was living in New York City, and we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, where we had no connectivity whatsoever. And I have to say, on the other side of it, 7 years later, now having moved to Green Bay, those years in Birmingham, Alabama, of all the places, was probably the most formative chapter of my adult life. And I
Mm.
think it was because a few things. We decided when we got there that we were going to really live there, not just exist and skate on the surface. And I think that was the most
Oh.
important thing as a family, that we just decided to, really dive in. And the second thing I think was we really leaned on each other, and it was really important in our relationship to we just got married, we didn't have kids yet. I mean, just really learning what we needed, improving communication, all those things that perhaps they were just a bit expedited for newlyweds.
Mm.
And it really forced us to go deep and ask ourselves what we cared about and what our values were and how we spent money and how we spent time and who we spent time with. And those things didn't happen organically. We almost really needed to cultivate each of those, be super intentional about it. And I look back on that and it was a hard road. But that movie's playing out again. So here I am 6 months into another move to the Midwest where we have no friends, no family, no connectivity, no network whatsoever for his job. And what I learned from the previous move was a couple things, but most of which is it's mindset. And we went in glass half full. We went in with optimism and open arms. We went in with an openness and a gratitude to newness. And change is really hard for most of us. It's really hard. But I think for us, it was the mentality and the perspective of appreciating that it was not happening to us. it was happening for us. And it was a gift that we were able to go see a different part of the country and live in a different community and meet new friends we never would have crossed paths with. And that there is nothing different. We are moving regardless, but it was the perspective, the lens through which we decided to look. And so I'm lucky to have a partner that believes in that and has the optimism and the gratitude. But I will admit to you, since you're so real on this show, there were many months where my response was not one of a supportive spouse. It was not pretty. And I'm not proud of that because it was a selfish response. What about my business? What about my friends? What about what I built here? I did this already, And so I had a choice to be resentful or to recognize that setbacks might be set up for something new. So I'm working on it, but it is really hard and it's required a level of intentionality that came with, practicing this once before. So I'm trying to get it right.
Yeah. And I think about when coming from New York, I'm originally from Toronto. It's like there's a very similar intensity there. And then moving to the South and then looking at the businesses you've started. And it's really beautiful, Jennifer, because there's a warmth to all of them that really seems to have that Southern hospitality that, they talk about. To go from New York, which is like, I'm all about me, I don't want to talk to you, to like, I always say the difference between the North and the South is like me versus we, right? Like, or with some states, and now you're in the Midwest and very similar. And so from being in Alabama, what is it that you have taken that you've learned there and it's permeated into everything you're doing now? Because I can see it so clearly after interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs, and I love it, but I'd love you to share that with the audience.
Sure. I'm curious as to what your answer is, knowing a bit of our story and having the perspective of having this type of conversation so many times. Here's the through line now that I'm not on the other end of it, I'm in the midst of it, but I have now launched two businesses and they couldn't be more different. They're both high risk and take a ton of time and capital, but one's a restaurant and one's a tech company. And I think what I tried to bring was a perspective of living in big places like Los Angeles or New York City, and recognizing when I moved to somewhere, a tertiary city like Birmingham and now Green Bay, that there are a lot of wants and desires and interest in innovation and new ways of thinking in these places, but there isn't necessarily a lot of investment. And so the question I asked myself was, were there learnings from my previous experience that can be translated to a place and appreciated, right? I'm not going to build a business that people don't want, right? I want to solve a problem, not push a product. And so when it came to the restaurant, it was leveraging learnings and experiences that I loved, that I thought, well, maybe there are other working parents that are looking for healthy food like me, but don't have the instant accessibility that I can find, a salad or green juice on a corner like I could in New York City. Yeah. Maybe there is an interest in that. And the same was for the hospitality industry with Crew. Is there a way for us to leverage technology in a new and novel way? And so trying to bring some learnings, but most importantly, I think what I learned was there's no manufacturing stuff from the outside and porting it into these towns. It's got to be homegrown. It's got to be organic, and it's got to have the community and the local economy first and foremost on the priority list. And I learned that. And I knew that it wasn't about bringing in a brand that I loved. It was about recognizing what was important to the people around me and building what was useful to them. Because we weren't in New York City anymore. We weren't in Los Angeles anymore. We weren't in Atlanta. We weren't in Milwaukee. We were in Birmingham. We're in Green Bay. And so recognizing the people, the humans, and for me, the humans in hospitality, and figuring out if we could support a local ecosystem first. And I don't subscribe to the if you build it, it will come, because I think you need to do your research, make sure that you're building something that will support the community. But we had this notion that if we built something even so small that it impacted just a group of people, in a very limited orbit, could we impact that, small, micro community, and in turn start to, through job growth, tax dollars, continued, requirements of leaning on other people in the community that did things like legal and compliance and accounting. Could we start to really fuel an engine here? And that's what we did. We built small and earned trust and really were able to grow from that. And so it just started with the local. And now, living and leaning on local is very in vogue, but it wasn't always, right? It wasn't always. And so that was our focus, was to look folks in the eye and try to solve a problem where we were, where our feet were, not what felt interesting to Silicon Valley or New York. And I think that has paid off.
To your point, there was a time when it was, oh, let's bring the New York business to Birmingham. I've been to Birmingham a couple of times, so I can speak from that place. And fun sidebar, everyone has their 15 minutes of fame. So I very, very publicly passed out on ESPN doing the Power Man in Birmingham. And I was out there with a lead pack of girls. I don't even know what year this was, like maybe 1998. And I was a pro duathlete, and I was running, and I totally collapsed. I had shingles. I didn't know. I was putting on all of this, Benadryl cream and stuff. I thought it was rash, and I just passed out on ESPN. Anyway, so that's Birmingham, but everyone's lovely.
Other than that.
So Jennifer, I read a statistic that 70% of Americans think about starting a business, but less than 7% of them do. So what gave you the courage to go, I have this idea for Blue Root, but I'm actually going to start it?
So by the way, not to throw a question at a question, but I wonder what percentage of that 7% is women, because I'd venture a guess, a pretty limited amount. We were talking about this a little bit of where do you conjure up the confidence to do something you've never done before? It's such a hard thing to jump off a cliff, and mostly because, and we're getting better as a culture, but mostly because the notion of failure is that big scarlet letter that nobody wants to wear. And we can talk. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I think that's really what holds people back. What happens if? And so I approached it a little bit differently. I had the good fortune and grace to have 10 years working in an investment bank under my belt. So I felt like I had a fairly good sense of the nuts and bolts of what I needed to make happen. I had a fairly good understanding of even just what financially I was going to need and how to even read a P&L. I also think the thing I learned after 10 years of working was to get really clear again with my blind spots and be really, really self-aware of the areas that I knew I didn't have a muscle to flex. And I was at a point in my career where I wasn't going to go out and learn some of those things, but I was going to lean into what I was really good at. And so I have to admit, I wanted to bring a big box brand from New York City to Birmingham because I didn't want to start a restaurant. This was a selfish endeavor when I was on the move traveling. I really wanted to start a family. It was a terribly difficult process. And I was trying to take care of myself and eat good food while I was working a weird, crazy job. I wrote manifestos to all the brands you'd imagine and begged them to come to Birmingham, giving them statistics and information and data and telling them that it was so compelling they couldn't pass it up. And the truth was nobody answered. And so the question I had in front of me was, do I just let this lie? This is now my home. I'm going to be here for the foreseeable future. Or do I do something about it? And I think part of me was, it was a bit of naivete coupled with a certain understanding of where I knew I was good and where I knew I needed to have some help. And the naivete was maybe what was part of it. And I think that's part of entrepreneurship a bit. But a lot of it was the courage to put it on paper and saying something out loud to my husband, to my friends, to my family, made it real. And then I gave myself really, really meaningful, impactful, but simple milestones to hit. And I told myself and my husband, I'm not going to just spend our life savings. These are what I need to hit. And if I don't, it's an easy off ramp. So I always felt like I had a good plan versus diving off a cliff without, any gear. I really felt like I had, whatever tools I needed to either, keep going or to take a left turn and say, okay, I tried. I really did. I gave it my best shot. And so by setting up two things, the milestones, so I knew at certain periods of time, I wanted to see these markers hit, and recognizing my blind spots. So leaning into others that had, the expertise or the acumen. I knew I had some guardrails in place. I knew I had somebody checking me on the areas I was, really not very strong in. For me, running a restaurant, I did not have a culinary background. I cook all the time, but I did not have that background. And the rest of it was really a time frame. And the last thing I did was we drew out as a family the worst case scenario. Are we comfortable with this? Can we do this if all of our wishes, disappear and nothing works? And to me, putting the hardest piece, which was failure on paper, made it
Mm,
real and almost, for lack of a better word, stomachable. And so that's how I got
yeah.
over that first hump. Was really, really trying to clarify, articulate, and outline. But it was work. I really did the work up front. And it's the whole adage of measure twice, cut once. And I
Yeah.
think that's what allowed me to be able to do something I had no business doing. Right. In addition to asking for help and leaning on great advice and having wonderful mentors and all the infrastructure around. But those were a couple things I did internally to make sure that me and we as a family felt okay about it.
Well, restaurants of all businesses have the highest failure rate.
Yep.
But I love what you said. You had an easy off ramp. In the hundreds of interviews I've ever done, I've never heard that before. I had an easy off ramp. We did the worst case scenario, and I knew that there were just multiple places, this highway where I was, wanting to go, but I could exit any time, and the risk was, relatively low compared to what a lot of people do is they go for that destination and they keep borrowing money, borrowing money, borrowing money, and they're in over their heads, right, Jennifer? And then
Yeah.
then they're laying, then the whole business collapses.
Yeah.
So the this starting the restaurant and with no culinary background. I mean, having a business background, I have friends who have restaurants and they're great chefs, but they do not have a business background. And so when you said you had no business starting that restaurant, I would say you had more business starting the restaurant than a great chef, right? You can always find someone to cook, but someone
Yeah.
who understands the P&L, who
Yeah.
understands how to do the projections. Glenn Stearns, who's been on the show a couple of times. So when he on Undercover Billionaire, when he started Underdog Barbecue, Glenn wasn't a restaurateur, right? He had 90 days to create $1 million business, but he was the business person. He knew, like you, how to gather the right people. I want to talk about crew because
Yes.
there's so many questions I have for you because the number of startups in the United States that are tech startups that have at least one female founder is, let alone a CEO, is less than 2%. It's incredibly small. And so here's what VCs would say to you, but you came from this world, so and you're New York tough and LA tough. And they would say, well, oh, Jennifer, you already have this restaurant. Now it's like, what business do you have starting a tech business? And so going from having the restaurant to starting crew, what were some of the criticisms you heard?
Yes. The number one for me was you you have your hand in too many pots, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of value in listening to criticism, and a skill that I've tried to hone and I'm still working on it is really filtering out the noise and trying to hone in on feedback that's actually really helpful. And I'm not saying all of it is, and I'm not saying you should cast aside, take all feedback in or cast all of it aside, but really trying to filter through and understand, are there threads here that I keep hearing? What really is it that is precluding somebody from investing, supporting, whatever it may be? And so I heard that, you can't do both. And I actually do subscribe to this philosophy of being more focused and sharp shooting and, a bit more of the sniper versus the shotgun. Not spreading yourself too thin. I try really hard, even during the day, to focus on a task versus context switching. We know that's really hard on the brain. So I actually really subscribe to that. But the reality was, like, I had this restaurant and I also was a mom, and neither one of those things was going away. So I either could capture and seize this moment or I could let it pass me by. Right. And that moment it really came to us as the great resignation was taking this country and the world by storm. And we were in a really unique position as, five founders, one technical software engineer, and four hospitality people that were living and breathing this every single day. And I decided to seize the moment and I decided to push back. VC said, we will never, ever, ever see investment in you because you have more than two founders. It's never going to happen. It
Mhm.
happened, right? You will never be able to be successful because you have too many voices around the table. Well, you know what? I think our team is actually our strongest asset. So a lot of this, you don't look like what we've seen before. We really had to either dispel the myths or just be comfortable with the bullets that were flying and
Yeah.
really lean into the conviction that we had in not just the technology, but our philosophical approach of putting the humans first, right? Like trying to
Mhm.
lean into this notion of supporting the humans in hospitality. And I'm still combating a lot of that, but I now have, a couple of reps, a couple of wins, and some funding under my belt to be able to say, I hear what you're saying, but I'm still confident in our approach. And I'm going to politely disagree, but I really appreciate you. I thank you for your feedback. And sometimes that's all you need to say. Thank you for your feedback, right? And take it and bank it. But I really am trying hard to listen. I think some of the some of the questions were also on, I don't have technical acumen, right? I worked in cybersecurity, but really on the strategy and operations and finance side. I'm not an engineer. What business do I have running a tech company, right? And last but not least, you're in Birmingham, Alabama. Like, get yourself to New York or Silicon Valley so you can really play with the big boys. Well, you know what?
Mhm.
I'm not moving to Silicon Valley or New York. I'm actually moving to Green Bay, which is a smaller town. And we're still going to be successful. And to really
Mm.
again pushing against again what I call, some of the norms. So it goes back to conviction, confidence, perhaps a little naivete, but now in the second round, the difference here is that I've got this team, right? I really have this arsenal of killer experience, instinct, execution. And that's what makes us unstoppable. But those people that said you're doing too many things, they're right. And I am not running the restaurant day to day anymore. It's still mine, but really I wanted to choose and lean in hard. And my little one, she's my priority, my family, and getting this tech company to the place I know it can be. So I'm still navigating the feedback. But look, I worked in at an investment bank for 10 years and there are very few women. The ratio is very much slated against us.
You're from New York anyway, so you know how to
It's just,
boomerang. I love that. I love what you said. Well, yeah, we may look different, but that's our asset, not our liability. Like, you go, girl. Like, just whoop,
yeah.
yeah, just
I guess you just got to get comfortable with the criticism because, particularly as a
yeah.
female entrepreneur, like it's just going to come. Like there's just never going to be a world in which it doesn't happen. So I don't know. The thicker the skin, and also just let it be porous enough to listen to the good feedback, but let the rest of it just slide off. And just surrounding yourself by really good people. I've got mentors and advisors that are helping gut check me. Do I need to listen to this? So I think that's what it comes down to. Really, again, it goes back to that village. So
Yeah,
mhm.
definitely. And I love that you said that so for my new startup, the one of the things I've been doing is going for lunch with VC friends and reverse engineering it from before we've
Mm,
taken on one investment and just saying, if we were going to go to an A round in 18 months from now, let's reverse engineer it.
love
Here's
that.
what our deck looks like. Here's what the plan looks like. This is my customer acquisition. This is why I know I can hit this target. That is why it's actually a low target based on what I know I can hit. And I was having lunch, Jennifer, with one of my VC friends who's a mentor of mine. And he said, no, this is it. There's only one thing I would do differently. And it was great because they have to your point, they have their checklist.
Yeah.
But there are new funds emerging. My new startup is in menopause tech. That is
Hmm.
a new category. I'm on an airplane and I love what you said. Be intentional. Like you have your ethos, you're intentional, whether it's affirmations, whatever it is. And I'm coming back from seeing my dad who's not well. And it's a 5-hour flight from DC to Phoenix. And I sit beside this gal. And one of the things she does, she has one of her funds, they only invest in menopause. Like,
What?
I'm not even kidding you. And
What
so
are the chances?
yeah, she and I, by the time the show goes live, she and I will have had dinner and it's the same conversation. I won't disclose her name, but it's like, this is what I'm doing. This is the plan. This is why I know like my zone of genius is B2C. I've done B2B when I,
Yeah.
was the CEO of Radius. I know how to bring in the big deals. I know how to do recurring revenue, but this is our plan. And here's the thing I would say, because I invest in tech, is I would look at you and go, actually she's more qualified than a data scientist or an engineer because girlfriend owns a restaurant. And if you look at what Crew does, and it's human first, human, in hospitality, what business does someone have building that business if they don't know hospitality? So I would say you're actually more qualified. You would be for, as an investor, I give you a much higher priority than just yet another Me Too company that has a data scientist or an engineer at the helm. That, in my opinion.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a very unique perspective. But to your point, I've had to lean in time and time and time again to different is not just good, it's better. And
Yeah.
that, like, whether I'm,
Different is not just
applying
good,
for a
it's better.
job or starting a company, and different is really differentiating. And some people get that, and some people, and that's okay. They're just not either the right investors, they're not the right partners, whatever it is. But we're all about innovation, and we're all about changing the way we do things. And to me, one of the hardest things to really wrap my brain around is when we keep doing this something the same way. And there's a more efficient, more interesting, more compelling way to do it, whether that's a different paradigm of what a CEO and a founder looks like, a different background, a different approach, a more innovative, philosophy. Different, I've learned, is really the superpower. And having a unique perspective and a background that my resume does not make sense on paper. It absolutely does not. But I think, when I talk to a lot of younger, particularly women, but younger people that are trying to figure out how to, land that next job, putting your resume in front of somebody that's not very interesting, but being able to tell a story about what you've gleaned from somewhere that you're able to, translate and give to your next opportunity. That's what's interesting. And that's where I've really tried to sharpen the sword for me personally, because I know I'm going to go into gunfire. I just know it. Now I'm prepared for it,
Yeah, absolutely. How did you get the initial funding for Crew? Because a tech startup isn't free.
It's not. It's not. Okay, so this is one of those, call it serendipity, call it coincidence, call it God, call it the universe, coming together. I now have learned over many years, you got to put yourself out there, right? You got to say what you want. You got to be really clear and intentional about it. And you got to say it out loud, because then your network, whether, implicitly or explicitly, your network can help. And so I sent the bat signal when we were starting Crew in Q4 of 21, when the world was falling apart and everybody's restaurants were closing, and you just remember that time. I had a baby in May and then launched a restaurant 8 weeks later. I mean, I would never recommend that to anybody. And then 2 months after that, we started the tech company. And when we were thinking about what we're going to do, we put our own capital in. There were 5 of us. There are 5 of us, I should say. And we really wanted to get some reps under our belt to make sure that it was, fruitful. When we decided to go out and look for capital, we went to our community first. The people that understood what we were doing for Birmingham, the people that, went to the restaurants, the people that were supporting the industry, the people that were, interested in seeing technology become part of the fabric of this town. And that's where we went to other humans. And we didn't go to institutional capital until, in a very serendipitous twist, my husband got a job opportunity in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And in this process of, meeting people, figuring out if we were going to move, I was casually introduced to a small VC firm that is a joint venture between the Green Bay Packers and Microsoft. And it's based in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it's called Titletown Tech. And that introduction would never have happened if the what the heck moment, we're moving to Wisconsin, had never happened. And so this is one more reminder to me to be open to change, to be open to twists, to be open to turns. And Titletown Tech led our round. We had a friends and family round that closed last year with people locally from our Birmingham community, and this fund that is investing, really in the Midwest, in companies like ours that are changing the game of how companies operate. And that was very, very special and very unique. And, Titletown it's a VC, but it acts in a much more human capacity. And it was the right fit for us at that early stage when we were really trying to find our footing. Clarify our story. I mean, you know how it is in the earliest days, right? You've got this thesis, you've got promise, but you've got to go prove it. And you need a little leeway from your investors to just have a minute to go prove that you can do what you know is possible. And they gave us that moment. And now here we are. We filled 10,000 shifts in the last year, and we're in 7 markets, and I've got this incredible team, and we'll be profitable this year. I mean, who knew?
That fast. I mean, let's pause for a moment and have the champagne moment, like profitable in a tech company in 2 years. in the hospitality space. Like, let's just like, there are so many things, Jennifer, that's just like, if you said that, 2 years ago, I'm going to build a company. It's going to be profitable in 2 years in the tech space. And I've never been a tech founder. And I am going to have a baby. So I have an infant and then who's going to become a toddler who gets into everything. And I'm going to do all this. A lot of people would have said, you're crazy. Like they would have nodded and smiled and then the door closed and they're like, she's never going to do that. And I personally love a she's never going to do that moment because, oh man, it makes me like, it fuels me.
It does. I completely agree with you. And you're right. I probably would have had a moment of pause too, if that's the track you would have projected for us. But we launched, in really, we've been around for a year and we'll be profitable by the end of next year. And you're right that the 24 months, I mean, look, we can dive into that to your point. It's a whole nother show of how we're going to get there and why I think we can do that and why the projections are conservative and this, that, and the other. But the fact of the matter is it started with surrounding myself with the right people, having the right team. It then progressed to bringing the right investors in. And you know what? The best advice we got when we were raising capital was not all money is the same. People say it's green, it doesn't matter. And you know what? You know this. It does, because those people are attached to you for almost a decade, if not longer. And so they've really got to be in the family and in it with you. And so really, we're so early on, but I really feel like we were very intentional about who we brought into the family. And that was part of the story, of fueling what we knew was possible. But it's still a climb, right? Today is a day where I'm riding on a high, right? We've really hit a lot of milestones. We have an incredible Q1 planned. We have expanded into new places. We have this wonderful team. There are deep, dark lows. And I know they're right around the corner because this is just how it works in the world of running a startup. And so, really trying to lean into when we're riding on the high and be grateful. And it all started with a couple people believing, right? But it goes back to that, even if cheesy notion of starting local, right? We went to the people in our community and that's where we started. So,
and that is huge. And that goes back to my question for you about the network. The thing that scares me the most, if anything, moving away from my network, I have a vast network, but moving and it's like, oh, okay. Whether it's something little like, oh, I go here, I get my hair colored, or I'm having my wall kicking moment. I pick up my girlfriend, we meet, we have, we go for dinner or my VC mentors or whoever it is. And that is something that, always being able as an entrepreneur, I would say of the hundreds of interviews I've done, there's one common theme is that entrepreneurs who make it know how to build their network. I want to ask you, how did you set your early valuation for Crew? Because that is that is just an interesting concept for so many startups, how they get there.
Well, I wish I had a more formulaic and scientific answer for you. It's a lot of this, right, in those early stages. And we did a bunch of work. Now, to put it in perspective, the world has changed so much in the last, we came together in 2021 in Q4. And it was still when valuations were out of control and there was tons of money moving around. And that has really corrected itself in the last, 18 months to 24 months, right? And so really, when we set that valuation, then we did some homework. We looked at competitors. We better understood what the landscape looked like, and we really thought a lot about what we could build. And then we gut checked it, across a few different resources. And I'm not sure that it was right or wrong. I think the people continue to remind me it's not going to be perfect. And right now, what you have is an idea on paper. So really, whether or not that was the right answer, Susan, I don't know. But we did set it. It was part of the friends and family rounds that we did last year in our convertible note, and it's there. And so the question for us now is, 2 years later, or I guess a year and change later, did we do what we were saying? Did we do what we said we were going to do? And the answer is yes. And so now, as we recalibrate and get ready, most likely for a larger raise in 24, I think that'll be, I hope, a bit more of a straightforward exercise. But it was one of the hardest things for me as a founder. I'd never done that. I didn't have to do that with the restaurant. To be totally transparent, I took out an SBA loan for the restaurant because I knew the failure rates of restaurants. And I didn't want to bring anybody down with me if we went down in flames.
Yeah.
I just didn't. And that goes back to, the notion of learning how to ask for help and learning how to, bring people into the fold. I just wanted to fail alone. And here we brought investors in. So there's a bit of trust in that process, as well as trying to corroborate the data with as many people as possible and kind of get the same answer. So I'm not sure. Is there a playbook for this that I missed, by the way?
Though it depends on the year. I love how you said, like, which way is the wind blowing, right? It depends on the year for the valuation. It depends on what is in the company. Like, there's so many companies will say, well, I'm an AI company. And in 21, that would get you a like even a pre-revenue valuation that was,
Totally.
you
Insane.
would just start and be like, oh, we're at 20 million valuation or $40
Right.
million
Where's the money?
valuation. And now that has changed. It has contracted. But then given what is going on in the economy and what the Fed is saying, I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's a VC. They were going to deploy 90 million in capital in 2023. They did one investment. They didn't deploy it. And they're waiting to see what the economy is doing. But at some point, they're going to have to deploy capital. And a lot of VCs are like this. They're holding back, but their investors are expecting them to deploy, because if they're sitting on the money, and you know this coming from your background, the money is depreciating in value because it's just kind of sitting there, whether it's in, even if it's in some kind of term deposit, just based on the inflation rates. So I predict, and my mentor always says, give a percentage. So I'm very bullish on next year, unless there's, more global uncertainty, there's another pandemic or something, God forbid. But I think there is going to be more deploying of capital. But what a lot of VCs are doing, it's like a mashup. When you take two singers, this used to be a trend several years ago, that have, it would be, it's like when Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg got together. It's like that kind of mashup. So what VCs are doing is they invested at conflated valuations in tech companies. And now those companies are doing down rounds. So they look for startups that can actually work synergistically with those tech companies and boost those companies back. And I think we're going to see a lot of M&A activity. I wouldn't be surprised if Crew is on several M&A lists right now. There are companies I know that have tried to penetrate this space. They didn't expand like you did. And that's why I said, kudos to you, my friend, like starting local, grassroots. I talked to another founder. She bought out all of her seed investors because they didn't get the vision. And she's like, I've decided I don't want any investors. And I'm thinking, God bless you, but at some point you're going to need to scale, and you can't scale a tech company unless you're maybe she's sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars.
Sure.
I don't know, but you will need to scale, to your point. But I see very clearly where you have a very clear path to M&A or IPO. Have you thought about it, or do you want to disclose that, like M&A or like IPO or acquisition?
I think all of the avenues are on the table, not to sound so cagey. I think all the avenues are on the table. And for us, we're so young that I can envision a lot of different exits, a lot of different outcomes. I think with the space that we're playing in, so we try to get super specific. And by the way, just to comment on one thing you said, I'm also bullish on next year. My projections would read otherwise because I have tried to keep things pretty conservative, and just in case, to make sure we've got the runway, to make sure that if God forbid we can't raise or whatever else, like we still get to that point of profitability. But I do think we're going to start to see a lot of capital unlocked. I suspect there's some conversations about rate cuts. I mean, there's some things macroeconomically that I think are going to encourage those funds to flow. And there are folks like us that I think have not been overvalued, that are ready and willing for the right partners, right, and the right capital. All that to be said, when I think about, flash forward several years, we've chosen just to play in a very specific space. And I commend my team for really, really sharply focusing on both the industry that we're focused on. I mean, I get asked all the time to lean into manufacturing, into agriculture, into all sorts of other spaces because the technology is applicable. I know we can get there and we can grow. For better or for worse, Susan, we've decided to stay sharp, basically, the sniper approach on the hospitality industry, but also in these markets that are underloved and flyover zones, the South and the Midwest. A lot of our competitors play in the big places that you'd imagine. And with my team, we chose not to play there right now. We may get there at some point, but we're playing in a very specific industry, in a very specific geography. And I imagine, flash forward, that could be an interesting puzzle piece for a big company that doesn't want to build it out themselves, right? And so I imagine at some point in 5, 6 years, somebody turns around and says, we forgot about 30% of the country that need us. And we decided not to innovate and invest there. But you know what? Crew did, because we believe in supporting these communities that are looking for a lot of the innovation and investment and interesting things that are happening in some of those big cities that you and I, know so well. So that could be an off ramp. And I also imagine if growth continues, we could be in a really interesting position to be on the other side of M&A. So we're open minded. I think what we're trying to do is really keep our eye on the ball. And I don't, you as a founder, it's so hard. You've got to be acutely focused on what's happening day to day, but you also have to keep the team's vision so clear, keep the dream alive, and toggling between those two is a skill I'm really still trying to work on, because you can get marred in either one. You can be too detached from the day to day and not understand how you need to be pivoting or, navigating. Or you can be so marred in the details, you forget where you're going. And so keeping those end game options open while recognizing that the only way any of those avenues is open to us is if we deliver today. We've got to deliver today. So we've got big, big dreams and big goals, but at the end of the day, my job is to make sure the train's on the tracks and we're doing what we've promised ourselves and our investors we can do. And we've got a really clear, 12 to 24 month view of what that looks like. So I hope, like many of these moments in my life, the hard work, the perseverance, the planning puts us in a position of opportunity, whatever that looks like. And who the heck knows what the opportunity looks like in 12 to 24 to 36 months, how could we have planned for the last few years? Right.
Oh, and even the next 12 to 24 months, right?
No
Jennifer,
chance.
that I was at I was invited to this think tank called Humans First. And there's a group of people and, we're sitting in this room and we're discussing the future of humanity and AI and different perspectives and things like that. And I said, how many of you have heard of ChatGPT 18 months ago? And they're like, none of us. And I said, so we can't predict, the next 12 to 18 months, but here's what we can predict. We can predict resilience and grit of humans. We can predict that, for certain industries, people still want to eat, they want to connect, they want to do that. And so it's evident to me, Jennifer, your trajectory. And if I was just sitting in a room, not like in this global living room that we're sitting in, I would look you in the eye and say, I love that as a founder, you're like 6-7 years, I'm going, because that's, that's necessary. I think your off-ramp opportunities are going to come a lot sooner than that. Just, you're a very rare founder. You get the numbers, you understand what it takes, you have the humility to know what those blind spots are and that willingness, and it's rare. So I'm excited to watch this journey unfold for you.
Oh, I'm so grateful for that. It's how lonely, this because you've done it, but how lonely it can be when you're running a company, because it is it feels like we're in a private conversation, yet I know that, so many people are going to be listening to this. But, there's two things I think a lot about, one of which is I talked to a lot of people about taking the leap to do it in and of itself. And we touched on that a little bit earlier, really finding this notion of confidence and courage, which I really do believe has to be learned and earned. It just doesn't come innately to all of us. So just practicing jumping off the cliff, practicing taking a chance. But this other reality, particularly as a female founder, and it just comes up enough with other female founders, it's very lonely. And so I really appreciate the words of confidence, because most of us need it. We need the fuel from somebody else who's sat in those shoes and has been successful, particularly if it's a female, to say, okay, I see you, you're on the right track. So I just personally deeply appreciate that, because you don't want to shout out to the world when you're failing, right? You want to put on a strong face. You want your team to have a strong leader, but it's really hard, particularly when, most of us have never done this before. And there's some sort of assumption that we've got a playbook, and we do not. Looking at my whiteboard right now, I mean, holy cow, there's a lot to do. So anyway, just a real deep thanks. And, obviously for this conversation today, but for the acknowledgement for all of those, any founder, but particularly female founders who are out there, like, we see you, you are not alone. And there are very few of us, but I think learning how to find community and leaning into what we've all learned is a really special thing. And that's particularly been some quiet fuel in my engine over the years. So,
well, and as a mom, and the gift I will give to you, because everyone who comes on the show, we all become friends, is that I never apologize to my children for from working, because we live in a world where, somehow, we have to apologize for working. I never apologized. I said, mommy's going on a trip. Here's why I'm going on the trip. Here's who I'm going to meet. And even when the kids were little, like your daughter's age, I would bring them to business meetings. And I have 4 kids, and my youngest now is 14, but my 18-year-old, she's working in hospitality, is really funny. And she's like, it was a slow night the other night. So I interviewed the security guys. And I said, what did you ask them? And she's like, I wanted self-defense tips. I want to know why they're here, what their ambitions are, because she grew up in an environment that you're curious. You're not, as a woman, apologizing for your ambition. Elon Musk is not apologizing for his ambition whatsoever. And it's a very large ambition that he has. That I didn't apologize, Jennifer. It didn't mean I wasn't torn apart in pieces at times. I wanted to be there every soccer game, every recital, everything. But I didn't apologize, because I didn't want my girls, especially, to ever think they had to apologize for production.
I needed to hear that, and I didn't realize I did. So I really appreciate it, because it is so real. And I do. And I think about why I work personally, but I also think what I'm bestowing on my daughter, what skills, values, meaningful through lines of how to approach life, and the permission to choose her own adventure. I think about that a lot. She's 2.5, we're grappling with these existential conversations at home. But what I'm trying to do is, we know kids don't learn by us telling them things. They learn by watching us.
Yes.
And it's such a good reminder, because those little habits of apologizing for something that we shouldn't be sorry for quickly gets caught in their vernacular. It quickly becomes part of their psyche. And I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. And I really appreciate it. So for all you listening out there, if you needed to hear it too, like me, it's just a really, really good reminder. And being unapologetic about creating and building and improving, the lives and the systems around us, like contributing. So thanks. I really appreciate it. With 4 kids, my God, it's just incredible. So, wow, what an inspiration.
Well, thank you.
I'm folding this into my own approach of working momhood. So,
yeah. Well, and the only way we are ever going to have more women founders is conversations just like this. And, the other thing I'll say to you, I would get the kids together. We'd make family vision boards. I remember one was Bali, the 4 seasons. And I'm like, okay, this is what I'm working on. And here's how it's going to go down. I'm going to be there for dinner. We always sat down as a family for dinner. Then I'm going to be there for homework. And then I'm going to tuck you in, but you're going to probably hear me, because I'm going back on my office and I'm calling from East Coast to West Coast, and I'm going to be doing these things. And they'd be like, how close are we to Bali? Or what can I do to help you? Or, can you take the dog for a walk? Because I don't want the dog barking while I'm doing something. And we celebrated because they contributed. And that's the thing I will say. And, God, thank you, God, all of them, like 3.9 GPA, 4.0 GPA, like I never pushed them in school, because they saw me push myself, and I didn't even have to push them. And so that would be my contribution. But Jennifer, you have got this. I am so beyond excited for you.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for all you have done. It's just such a gift to have the conversation today. And I mean, listening to you and hearing the stories, so many stories that you've unearthed that I never would have ever heard or learned about. It's really been a pleasure. So I appreciate the vote of confidence. I'll keep you posted.
Well, thank you. Well, if all of Jennifer's links are in the show notes. And tag us on social if this has been helpful. And as Jennifer said, leaders ask for what they want. So our bat signal is like, if you're a mom, if you're a grandma, please tag us if this has been helpful. If you're a dad, a single dad, we are all in this together. And Jennifer, thank you again so much for being here. And I'm so excited for your moonshot. I see it so clearly.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, with that, this has been another episode of Raw and Real Entrepreneurship. And I hope you go out there and just crush your dreams and have the courage to do so. And I will see you in the next episode. Are you currently an employee looking to start your own business? Maybe you've been thinking about it for a while and you're just not sure where to start. Well, my course, Employee to Entrepreneur, combines my decades of experience as an entrepreneur with proven methods, techniques, and skills to help you take that leap and start your own business. This course is self-paced, learn on demand, and comes with an incredible workbook. And that will allow you to go through this content piece by piece by piece, absorb it, take action, and then go on to the next module. So check out my course on susansly.com, Employee to Entrepreneur.